Well, how about the Toronto Region Board of Trade here and all the work they do? Let's give them a round of thanks, Giles. And thank you, Giles, for going through most of my speech. How did he get that, team? I don't know how that happened. Great to be working with you here this morning, Giles, and your extraordinary team. It's going to be a great day for all of you folks, and I'm just honored to be able to kick it off. I'm here today with Chief Claire Saul, Mississaugas of the Credit, the important work and friendship that we have. And as these are your traditional lands, we honor your presence here today. And of course, you were already honored, but he's a dear friend and colleague, so it's good to have you here as well today. I know you had other things to do, but wanted to be part of something that I believe is a watershed moment in our government's history with respect to the Ring of Fire, with respect to legacy, infrastructure, policy options, and such. For a region, ladies and gentlemen, that's near and dear to my heart, for Northerners, it's important to understand that this is a region of 800,000 square kilometers. It spans from the Manitoba border to the Quebec border, James Bay coast and the Hudson's Bay coast. There are less than 1 million people. It is populated by approximately 75 to 80 First Nations and a number of municipalities, some of them the largest in the province with some of the smaller populations. I say this for context. I always like to create a landscape for you. It's a beautiful place. It's one that we all would have an interest in protecting and preserving and responsibly developing. Just in this past week alone, I left Keewatin, which is a 22-hour drive from here, but in our province. I found myself in Sault Ste. Marie yesterday celebrating the Robinson-Huron Treaty, kind of economic reconciliation that puts a treaty on a go-forward and implementation basis, one of the largest settlements in the history of the world with respect to First Nations. And I want to thank Premier Ford and this government for moving forward on that important work. Similarly, we have settled land claims and flood claims throughout the province, but particularly in Northern Ontario. So as this relationship is reset, it has the confidence and trust that we know how to put the priorities of First Nations as full partners in a good place to build what we're building. Tonight I'm off to Timmins and I'll finish the week in Sudbury. There's a lot going on in our big towns and big cities across this region, but today I'm going to double click, as my good friend Rod Phillips would say, on the Ring of Fire. Before I get into that, into its heart and soul, the meat and potatoes as it were, I should say to you folks that across Northern Ontario there's a palpable enthusiasm going on around critical minerals writ large. We have extraordinary opportunities where we're partnering with First Nations in the far northwest of Ontario. Pikangikum First Nation and our government are working on building a bridge across the mighty Barrens River as we endeavor to access quantitatively and qualitatively one of the finest fiber baskets perhaps in the world, but with exclusive license to that forest, a UNESCO heritage site. It's that community and the Government of Ontario that will work and move forward with them to access that fiber basket, develop it responsibly. There's also Frontier Lithium with a significant lithium play there, and it will create an opportunity for more than 10,000 First Nations people living in isolated communities to have road access. Road access, ladies and gentlemen, to better economic, social, and other kinds of programs and services that we take for granted. As Giles mentioned, I might know a thing or two about that. I spent more than 10 years of my life living and working as a nurse in isolated communities across Canada, but mostly in Northern Ontario. And so I have a real feel and relationship for and with the communities and their leaders generationally now. I'm old enough to say that. To understand that the stars are aligned, that we have an extraordinary opportunity to advance the interests of this province and indeed this country, as Prime Minister Carney said as much in issuing his list of major projects, but also to live up to a standard that we've all come to expect down here for First Nations communities living in the isolated and remote parts of Northern Ontario. Let's just talk a little bit about Toronto, just a little bit. You know, on my way in here today, like every day, I see a new profile to several sectors of our economy here in Toronto. They're on full display. Electric vehicles powered by minerals processed and mined in Northern Ontario. I see buildings fortified with nickel, cobalt, platinum, copper, found right here in abundance in Ontario. We know that the Toronto Stock Exchange does more mining IPOs than any other exchange in the world. And on my way in today, I asked my friend to look up on ChatGPT. He said there's going to be 300 people here today. And I said, ask them how many people in an audience of that size would either have a smartphone. Turns out almost 95% of you do here today. But more importantly, 1/3 of you are either looking at it right now or it's within 6 inches of you and you're probably glancing at it. I would like to think that my speech will be riveting for the next 10 minutes or so. But I will tell you this. The iPad that I'm casually using to present to you today and the phones that are near you or in your hand absolutely depend on the kinds of critical minerals that Northern Ontario has in abundance. So how about that, folks? Is that a shout out for what we're going to try to do here in this amazing province? I hope so. So if you'll just take the next 10 minutes and resist the urge to look at your phone, let's talk about our critical mineral strategy. As its author, obviously, we saw an exciting opportunity to develop this responsibly, but to put First Nations communities as full partners in every aspect of the development of what we're trying to accomplish. That was important for a couple of reasons. One, I can't imagine the success of any of these projects going ahead without them, particularly in the region that they are. Two, Giles, I appreciate what you presented here today, but the news isn't all that bad, frankly. We needed some frames of reference, and you'll remember, Giles, that in the first 4 years of government, within a couple of months, we dispensed of the regulatory barriers to open up the sugar zone, and how sweet it was. I like that joke, but it's not that good. Cote Gold Project, Magino in Dubreuilville. Frankly, these are large base metal gold mining operations. And of course, Greenstone Gold, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about the community of Greenstone, where it is and how it fits into the Ring of Fire. All of those projects were, Giles, in full acknowledgement and responsibility, bogged down in process and regulatory layers provincially and federally. We need not spend time thinking and saying that this had anything to do with First Nations. I keep a database, as it turns out. You know, I remind my little girls, I say, why are dads so smart? And they say, I don't know. I said, because we use databases. Not so good. Anyways, but I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, what this information provided us was a source that more than each and every First Nations community could have up to 80 different processes or duties to consult with different levels of government. We're talking about communities with populations of anywhere from 100 to 1,500 or 2,000 people, and serious capacity issues, regardless of our funding, would arise. So we reset how we were going to approach this. We worked with First Nations communities, and each one of those projects that I just rattled off went from a conceptual piece on a bookshelf to construction and now actively producing 300 to 400,000 ounces of gold a year. So we know how to do this, Cornelius, right? We know how to get this right. Move at the speed of business, right? Get efficiencies that don't compromise environmental integrity and interests that we all have, and ensure that we have the kind of legacy infrastructure to support it. And that brings us a little closer to home in the Ring of Fire. This region, ladies and gentlemen, is magnificent. It is, in no uncertain terms, one of the most valuable global carbon sinks that we have. Its vastness is also characterized, unfortunately, by a group of communities most proximal to the Ring of Fire, who are the last communities in this region to be on diesel generation. Is there anybody that thinks that that is a good idea? I know a couple of people in this room who think it's a terrible idea. I have lived in those communities, and when those sources of electricity or energy go down, it turns into a crisis very quickly. As a consequence, and no road access, they have brittle infrastructure, broadband that's difficult to get optimal use out of, and the kind of legacy infrastructure, whether it's buildings, wastewater, and water treatment facilities, run, unfortunately, with the kind of scarcity that again throws these communities into crisis when it breaks down. So, geez, Greg, this sounds like a lot of bad news. No, I don't see it that way. I think that when we discuss the Ring of Fire, we should spend our time thinking about a couple of important things. That legacy infrastructure into the region of the Ring of Fire, and I'm not sure if the map was going to come up here whilst I spoke, would not only serve the interests of the province of Ontario and its people to develop the Ring of Fire, I'm going to return to that in a moment, but to provide the kind of legacy infrastructure for these communities that farther west of this corridor that you see, many isolated and remote First Nations communities already have. The Watay Power Line, which of course was a $2 billion project that we kicked off as a new government in 2018 and 19. That was a layover from when I was the Minister of Natural Resources, federally and responsible for the communities in Northern Ontario. We got down to business and started to build that. The problem is, the challenge and then the opportunity is that corridor now represents an opportunity to bring clean energy into that region. And indeed, to the credit of our newly minted Minister of Energy and the great work that he's done quickly to bring electrification and optionality around local pellet capacity and the likes, as corridors will clear non-merchantable wood, clean energy locally to those communities. And so you start to put together in your mind the sense that this isn't just about building a mine. And in fact, some of us would think that thinking about it and building a mine in isolation is a recipe for disaster. And it is. It would be. But it's not going to be. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we're partnering with First Nations from the very beginning. Chief Cornelius Wabas here today and other partner communities have committed by shared partnership agreements and ones that are soon, you'll hear about very soon, to get into the business of leading the environmental assessments in that region, driven by and founded in principles and virtues and values of the First Nations who have been living in this region for nearly time immemorial. It's a great policy option for a province to think about, right? Making sure that those First Nations have access to the kind of modern infrastructure that, quite frankly, we take for granted. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, it would probably be the best environmental policy ever advanced by a sub-sovereign government in the government of Ontario to the world, to bring a credible plan to the fore that brings clean energy to those last half a dozen isolated communities who are without clean energy. A corridor for better social health and economic opportunity and hopefully prosperity. And again, advance the interests of building the Ring of Fire. Are we a little bit more confident about the prospect of what we're working on here? Ladies and gentlemen, I hope so. I know that through the media, we hear stories, and there is more work to be done with First Nations communities in that region. But I wanted to come today with a clear message that we are in the business of working with the municipalities and the First Nations communities most proximal to the corridor to prosperity to make sure that this is done right, that make sure it's done effectively, and make sure it's done efficiently. We can't do that without First Nation partners. And so, as you would see on the Highway 17 portion of the Trans-Canada as it splays out in our vast and beautiful region, this is really about building a corridor that is roughly the distance between Toronto and Montreal. And that from the moment you turn off of Highway 17, the Trans-Canada Highway, you start to understand that these small municipalities and First Nations communities need the kind of support from the private sector and governments, provincial and federal, to ensure that every aspect of this development is done right. I was there with the Premier in Greenstone proper. Some of you might know it as Geraldton, Ontario. The Greenstone municipality is, in fact, the second largest in land municipality in the province and has its lowest population. It is, in fact, comprised of a number of little towns that many of you may not have heard unless you visited that beautiful region. And of course, it is surrounded by First Nations communities immediately to Geraldton, and it is a corridor to Arrowland First Nation, a couple of secondary roads that then form the basis of our winter supply road. That would be the last policy piece that I would touch on as I move to some exciting news here for you this morning. The fact of the matter is that these roads are essential for winter road access for the isolated communities. These are roads that bring in supplies and materials for the next year's build. And because of the effects of climate change, no question about it, those winter roads have gone from 4 to 6 weeks back in my time when I was working as a young man and a nurse in those communities to as little as a couple of weeks. We need a plan, folks. We need a plan that builds all-season roads. I can't think of a community in Northern Ontario in its isolated parts that I haven't worked in and that is not accessible by road that doesn't need or want one. These are essential elements of a vision for policy that we have to pursue. So, that corridor that you see that leads into Geraldton and parts beyond has to start somewhere. And it becomes abundantly clear to you when you turn there that a couple of exciting things are happening, but a couple of other things need to happen. First and foremost, the McGeezy Plaza is being developed right there. This is a First Nations owned and operated plaza that will be a large service area for commodities and commercial services, the capacity for large machinery to stage there. I think they're even planning on a Tim Hortons donut place, if I'm not mistaken, and significantly upgrade the commercial capacity of Geraldton. And First Nations communities, AZA, Arrowland, Ganoogaming, and Long Lac 58 are leading that charge. We're putting in places the kinds of infrastructure right there that will ensure that that corridor, as it starts, has the right kind of business feel to it, led in partnership with First Nations from the minute you turn off into what we have framed 6 years ago, in fact, it was longer than that when I was federal, as a corridor to prosperity. But there's something missing. And I didn't want to miss the opportunity, Giles, to treat the Toronto Region Board of Trade to an opportunity to actually announce the first major physical step in the development of the corridor to prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm joined here today by the Mayor of Greenstone, Jamie McPherson. Jamie, where are you? Stand up, folks. And his Chief Administrative Officer, Mark Wright, who have made it a priority to partner with First Nations in every aspect, and what I'm about to announce here today is contingent upon that. And I appreciate you folks for being here today. But it's time to get started. And to the tune of $61.8 million, the province of Ontario is announcing that commencing almost immediately, so this fall, we will be rehabilitating and upgrading Main Street of Geraldton. This 5-kilometer stretch from where the Trans-Canada base is in and through Geraldton cannot handle the kind of commercial and industrial and personal travel that is required to build a corridor that will revitalize the region, create enormous opportunities for First Nations communities much farther north. This first segment of building the corridor to prosperity into the Ring of Fire, and as importantly, the communities most proximal to it, represents not only the single biggest infrastructure announcement for Greenstone in its history, but the first announcement for physical, real construction activity in that region. How about that, folks? That's worth celebrating. This legacy corridor will provide a new face and complexion to what Ontario is offering. It's what I've been talking about this morning, and as the minutes, final minutes of my presentation are at hand, I know that there are a number of friends and partners from 2 chapters of my political career, a number of industry leaders here today who may not have known that this was our intention here, but we just think the important work of the Trade Board compelled us to announce this. We'll be sure to go up to that beautiful region and make sure that the community understand what's going on here. We've been doing a lot of work to pre-position this announcement, but how about we build a corridor to prosperity after that presentation? Is everybody good with that? The Ring of Fire, folks, I'll just close by saying, is one of Ontario's greatest assets in the face of not only the threats from the United States, but also, frankly, the unfortunate way critical minerals too often get to market through Chinese and Russian supply chains and other parts of the world that are being exploited principally by at least one, if not both, of those 2 countries. It's bad for labor, it's bad for the environment, it's bad for the Indigenous communities that are in some of those countries that they are currently working in. We're going to do it differently. We have been doing it differently. And I hope today that what you take away is that Ontario will, in fact, not only develop other critical mineral projects across the vast region of Northern Ontario in this manner, but in the Ring of Fire and commencing in the beautiful town of Geraldton or the municipality of Greenstone, the right kinds of partnerships and the right kind of work that gets down to the business of building the corridor to prosperity. I want to thank the Premier for his incredible leadership, for understanding that way, for carving out an opportunity for me to focus on community and economic partnerships to get to where we are today, set the standard for what we will do tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Greg Rickford. I'm the Member of Provincial Parliament for the Great Kenora Rainy River riding. It's a privilege and honor to serve my constituents. But as a huge fan of what the Toronto Region Board of Trade is doing, and you as interested and industry leaders to serve you too. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Minister. And good morning. Just wanted to say, acknowledge my Indigenous brothers and sisters of the Greater Toronto area for being here and enjoying the beauty and the bounty and the blessings of their homelands. My name is Michael Fox. I'm the founder and CEO of Indigenous Community Engagement. It's an honor to be here among you folks at this conference, Building Together Indigenous Business and Infrastructure, with the theme of the Ring of Fire. I think those of us that are in the loop in the Ring of Fire, I guess, understand that it's about not just critical minerals, critical infrastructure, but actually critical relations with the Indigenous communities. And there are folks in this room that understand that. I think the Minister, Mining and Energy, really appreciate you being here. And others like Mario, you're here, and Qasim Sadiq from Slop, they know that if you're going to build mines anywhere in the far north, particularly in the Webakwe area, that you're not building mines. You have to build communities. You have to build capacity. You have to build partnerships, and everything's on the table. Around those partnerships for Webakwe, and they're open for business. And we got Gordon here at the table here, and he's in charge of the negotiations for lands and resources and setting up his master LP limited partnerships to those partnerships. So I just wanted to mention that. So I have the privilege today to moderate the fireside chat with the two highly respected leaders here. Chief Cornelius, you want to come up, and as well as Honorable, is it just you or? Yeah, just okay. I saw him stand up. I was like, oh, something. Okay. So we'll start. And I'm going to, for the organizers, I'm going to just see if we can get back on track with the time, and ask just a few critical questions on this. Please welcome. Right here. Yeah. Test 1, 2. Does this work? It works. Very good. I just have to test it. Chief, the Ring of Fire discovery was 18 years ago. People here, especially corporate Canada, really don't know Webakwe's aspirations as it relates to the Ring of Fire. And I think it'd be insightful if you can share with the audience here, what is Webakwe's vision for itself as it relates to the Ring of Fire?
Thank you, Mike. I'm glad to be here today to be part of this event. I represent Webakwe First Nation as a chief. I've been chief for the last 15 years with my community, and I'm grateful that my community has confidence in me, to be able to do things for the community. We've come a long ways. Webakwe is a community of less than 1,000 people, and we have 800 on reserve and 200 off reserve, mainly because of health and education as well. And we have so many issues that we need to deal with at the community level. But we do, like Webakwe First Nation has a vision of their community. We've been working, with our community members on developing that vision, developing a system that may, bring, our vision come to reality for our community. We have a reserve. Before our reserve, we were just a settlement, community, people settling into one area to become a community, and then we came to be a reserve at some point, and then from there we had to work, on how we can, thrive on that reserve and using the resources that are on the land. So, when I got in as a chief back in 2009, That's when the Ring of Fire, was an explosion. When there was a lot of not mines, but what do you call those? Steak and rush, that. So that's when it was happening there. So everything was new to me at that time, and from there on, I started working on trying to get a picture of what is taking place, and then we found out that this is one of our visions. That this is one of the things that will make our vision come to reality. With the potential of mining in our community, that could help us with our vision, because our vision is with the reservation that we have there, we have to somehow find ways to flourish on that reservation. And so what we did was we created a vision of a tier 1 and a tier 2 and a 3, where tier 1 is the reservation and a tier 2 is a protected area, and tier 3 is where we have mutual agreements with industry and also with government. So from there we work together to make sure that that any development that happens in our area will prosper our community and have opportunities for our members as well too, and our young generation. So we have a lot ways to go. We have so many challenges, and we are still looking forward to making sure that this vision happens for our community, and our community stands with us on that. So moving that we can continue to be a partner in any development that happens in the area, and we are open for working together.
Thank you, Chief. Minister, you just heard what Chief just shared. How can Ontario support its Webequie's aspirations?
Well, I think that the next, it sits in amongst a couple of key priorities. Today was one of them, but the next important step, and in fact, Chief Wabass and I will be meeting with the Premier later today to set out some specific and key projects and get them going, driven within the community, built in the community that they need to proceed with construction on the north end, which is the Webequie Supply Road, which under the leadership of the Chief, of course, is near an end, and hopefully the province will be able to match the efficiency and the effectiveness that the community has led the environmental assessment process, and provide the kind of support for them to build infrastructure in their community so that the corridor to the north of us can start, and more than conceptually, we would have a road that is being under construction in the north and in the south. I would just close by saying, Michael, that folks, in the case of Webequie and so many other communities, mobilizing for the kind of work required to do construction projects of this size and scale comes down to building the kind of community building, multi-purpose facility, to do that. I mean, Chief Wabass just happens to be the biggest Toronto Maple Leaf fan in the world, but he also envisions a multi-use facility that can create good recreation and health opportunities for the youth, but a facility that in the off seasons and parts of the building year-round can train people. Obviously, part of the workforce that Giles alluded to, it is one of the most dynamic and workforces available in Northern Ontario to build these projects, requires things like support for daycare and building daycare centers. We've done that in a couple of other communities, but there are 3 or 4 things that Chief Wabass has on his mind that I suspect this afternoon will be discussed with the Premier and form the basis of the kind of agreement moving forward where we can get down to the business of putting shovels in the ground at the north end, otherwise known as the Webequie Supply Road.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Just maybe just one last couple questions, one for each of you guys. Chief, like in the Indigenous nations, elders are highly regarded and listened to. What has the elders in your communities? What have they said to you, and how they guide you today?
Yeah, that's right. Our elders are very important, for our communities, and they have a lot of knowledge and a lot of advice that they give us as leaders for our community. I know, my elder, he's passed away now, but I still, hold on to his advice to me, saying that that we have to continue working with industry, with government. We have to be open, to be able to make things happen for our community. So our elders are very important, and I keep and listen to the advice that they give us, and I still keep on playing a role in how we can manage some of the advices that they gave us. So it's very important.
Thank you. Our last question to you, Minister. What has the Premier said about the partner First Nations in the Ring of Fire?
Well, I got an extraordinary opportunity in the wake of the last election to talk to the Premier about what this project really was. To the Chief's point, and to some of the discussion points I made earlier, this is not just about building an opportunity to access an exquisite, qualitatively and quantitatively, mining site, or sites plural. It is about the development of a region responsibly, and the only way, in my respectful view, based on my experience and my relationships with the leadership and generations of young people who I have an interest in ensuring have the promise of economic prosperity and better overall health, that this is about community and economic partnerships. We have some companies in here today that have come forward to myself and Chief Wabass and other First Nations and said, look, we think the model that the Premier and the way that he's thinking about this is the only way that this can be done. So stylizing my portfolio by adding economic reconciliation has given me a number of different tracks, as I said earlier, to set these relationships in a good place to build the kind of infrastructure even here in southern Ontario with First Nations, but in particular for the purposes of today's discussion, north. And that is about community and economic partnerships. Make no mistake about it, if we don't get that right, mining cannot come after that. And as I said before, we have a frame of reference. We have done this efficiently and effectively when we make sure that we're doing more than just, I don't know how many lawyers are in the room here, we move beyond impact benefit agreements. We start to talk about sovereign wealth funds. I'm still thinking about it over there, Joe. And the Indigenous Opportunities Fund to the tune of $3 billion, which will not only provide capital for First Nations to be economic and community partners, but also hopefully to leverage that as instruments that can draw from the private sector and make that those amounts quantifiably more to not only build the legacy infrastructure required to support what we need to access this area and other parts of Northern Ontario, far Northern Ontario, but to also ensure that First Nations communities and or their businesses are full partners. I think that's a more comprehensive and sensible way to think about it. And I would just close, Michael, by saying, I mentioned the bridge into Pikangikum and the communities beyond. A bridge costs $35 to $50 million to build in an isolated part of Northern Ontario. And the only workforce that we have available there, frankly, are members of those First Nations communities most proximal to the project. So building capacity and training, as you alluded to in your opening remarks before we set to this panel, are other areas that the Premier has, under his leadership, has envisioned and put skin in the game by announcing the kinds of resources we believe that will fuel and inspire young people to get into Red SEAL training, heavy machinery operation, but also in the other fund to be involved in capacity of building legacy infrastructure, designing it, and to participate in the development of resource activities like mining. And those are the 3 tranches of funding that were announced in the wake of our last election and in pre-positioning through a budget what we're committed to in the years going forward.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us this morning. And perhaps we can give us a little round of applause for their insight. Up next, we continue this important conversation with our next session. I'm pleased to announce our moderator, Alina Tuin. Is she here? Alina? There you go. Please join me. She's the Chief Strategy and Operations Officer for Building Ontario Fund. Alina will guide the discussion, so please help me welcome Alina.